Hello, and welcome to the EWTA podcast, where we present ideas that help empower people to be the conscious authors of their future. My guest today is a personal friend, Ethan Martin. He practices a discipline of consciousness work founded by Peter Ralston, known as I.C.G. I'm excited to share this unique work with everyone and its implications. I hope you enjoy. Ready to jump in?
Yeah.
Cool. Should we start out with the history, right?
Yeah, for sure. The I.C.G stands for Increasing Consciousness Group, and it was designed by Peter Ralston, who's a martial arts and consciousness teacher who's been exploring and teaching this type of work for 50 years at least by now, or around there. He's in his 70s, and he teaches several week-long intensives down in Texas at his dojo center in the spring and the fall. So people go down there, they train intensively for a week, and then there's multiple weeks you can do at any retreat. And so basically I've been going down there studying with him pretty intensively for the past 4 years in the martial and in the consciousness work. And the I.C.G was basically a program he designed to allow more advanced and committed students of his to take back to their communities to then practice being a facilitator and to present a workshop it's introductory, but it also is very profound at the same time. So basically I brought that back here, as being one of those students, and started teaching it about 2 years ago. This is the third one that I've been doing. And the way the I.C.G works is it's basically a 16-week program where we meet once a week, same time every time. It's a set class. So it's like you start it and you finish it. It's not, you don't jump in at any other point other than the beginning. And ideally you don't get out until the end. You want to stay committed to the whole program. So that's basically where the I.C.G comes from in essence.
So each week we have different topics, right? So do you want to talk a little bit about how those were formulated, or are they presented in a certain order for a reason? And then maybe talk about those grounding principles as well.
Yeah, so basically there's an overarching principle to the whole workshop, which is called the self-expansion principle. And that basically is trying to get the students to move and grow out of the common experience of what we're calling self-inversion, which is basically like being focused exclusively on yourself, relating to your experiences, other people, life in general, exclusively through your own self-concerns and needs. And this is the common experience. This is what most people find as the only option for how they can experience life and themselves. And so we're basically trying to get students to shift away to that, to a principle that we call self-expansion, which would basically be expanding your sense of self to include other people as well as whatever is true. And so when I say whatever is true, right now we're basically just talking about what is relatively true, or true in the relative domain. We're not talking about absolute truths or anything.
Right.
We're just talking about what did you do? What did they say? What do I actually feel? This type of truth. And so,
excluding what you think they might be thinking, something like that.
well, sure, because when you get really honest about it, you have no way of knowing what another person is thinking. As you move more in the direction of self-expansion, the process of doing that, we look into a bunch of different distinctions and principles that empower that movement. And primarily it's just grounded in basically honesty, which is something that does not necessarily serve your small inverted self. Like, being honest is not something that you're necessarily, as the self that you experience yourself to be, you're not necessarily actually interested in that. It actually probably gets in the way of you protecting yourself and staying the same. But as you engage it more powerfully, you become more sensitive to how common of an experience dishonesty is, and how lying to yourself or to other people, or being intentionally unclear or withholding or breaking your word to yourself or to other people, all of these are instances of being dishonest, projecting things onto other people that, really is just not there necessarily. So basically, honesty is this just foundational principle to consciousness work in general. Consciousness work is not possible without honesty, because consciousness work is relating to whatever is true. Mm-hmm. And so in order to move in that direction, you got to be honest, basically.
To get the clarity, right?
Sure, yeah. Clarity, or, a sense of like what's actually occurring outside of what you maybe want it to be, So yeah, there's principles such as honesty, integrity, communication is a really huge one, because as I said, with the self-expansion principle, including others, basically the only way that you have any experience or relationship to another person, or know anything about them, or have them know anything about you, is through being able to communicate with them. Otherwise, you're just kind of staring at each other, and you're like, you don't know what's going on over there, because there's no way to express and share. But since we can communicate, it's a big fundamental aspect of the work. And there's basically two aspects of communication. One is you being a communicator, communicating what your experience is to another person, and then them communicating to you, and you being like the receiver or the listener of the other person.
And that's part of the practice in I.C.G, right?
Yeah, right. So that's another kind of like aspect of the how it works, which is basically that in the workshop we engage a particular exercise called Dyads, which is basically a 2-person partner communication exercise, where most of the time it'll be preceded by a guided meditation by the facilitator, who will basically ask everybody to consider, a series of questions or assertions in the context of their own experience, so it'll be like, consider a time when you felt like you were really heard by someone else, or that you really got your communication across to someone else, or that you really heard them, like, what was that experience like for you? How did you feel in relationship to the other person? What was the effect on your relationship with them? And so that's kind of like a guided meditation. Each student will hear that, look into their own experience in relationship to what's being said, and then we'll do a dyad, where basically in the dyad, one person's the listening partner, one person's the communicating partner. And the listening partner basically doesn't do anything except for look directly into the eyes of the communicating person. And they don't say anything. It's not a conversation. They don't react in any way. They don't smile or nod or shake your head or frown, because all of those are basically cues that will influence how the communication of the other person comes across. Like, if you give these little micro social cues to someone else when they're communicating, they'll immediately click into social mode and start reacting to those cues rather than whatever is most true for them. So the listening partner role is very important, and we really take it quite seriously. That's the only thing in the work that we would kind of consider a sacred thing. And we just mean that we just take it really seriously.
Right.
So there's that, and then the communicating partner basically communicates whatever is true for them as honestly and authentically and as clearly as they can in relationship to whatever came up for them during the guided meditation. And then you go for 5 minutes, then we switch roles, and then the listening partner becomes the communicating partner becomes the listening partner. Communication, we train it daily, or in that exercise. We probably do 4 or 5 of those at least per night. And so we get a chance to train that, and then of course, task the students with going out into the world and trying to bring that level of communication, or that way of relating to communication, into their lives in real time. So basically the first half of the workshop is a lot of very grounded, pretty practical principles and distinctions that people can work on, such as, having integrity, keeping your word, being clear, communicating well. And all of those things are basically meant to shape up the person so that they are a more powerful, clear-minded, honest, authentic human being. And then in the second half of the workshop, it's 16 weeks, so the second half is another 8 weeks. We begin to look into more distinctions in consciousness works, such as like really questioning the nature of reality. What is mind? What is perception? Who am I? What is a concept? What is an object? What is language? All these things that are not things that people usually rigorously look into in a contemplative type of way. And so then it really starts to open up, and you begin to look into a lot of other things that are a profound aspect of our life, but yet which we remain, remarkably ignorant of the true nature of those things throughout most of our lives. Yeah.
So that totally ties into the next question I was going to ask about the implications, right? So some of the implications seem to be that it connects dots, not just a singular communication style, but communication style broadened over this whole perspective.
Well, it definitely opens up and becomes more about these less defined aspects of our experience, which are constantly happening, and yet we don't have, like I said, we don't regularly look into them. Or we don't question how does our mind work, Basically, becoming conscious of anything is unlike any other experience that a person normally has. However, most people throughout their lives have, whether they noticed it or not, had some sort of deep moment of clarity about something, where suddenly I get it, And it's not like an intellectual, you have a new definition for it, or you kind of logically understand it. It's suddenly you went from not knowing how something worked to grasping it, directly, it is crystal clear, and you don't need to try and explain it or rationally grasp it. It's just the truth of the matter.
Is that something like being self-actualized? It's a lived experience?
It's definitely a lived experience. And the key word there would basically be you experience how something works, what something is. Again, it's not intellectual. It's not conceptual.
Right.
And yeah, I'd say most people have had something like that happen, like an insight or a breakthrough and whatever, some skill they're training, or some understanding of themselves, somehow you get it. And so basically what we're going for in the I.C.G and in consciousness work in general is is an insight into the true nature of whatever is going on. And so the implications of doing something like the I.C.G is you're training your ability to open up to that. To the possibility, not only of the possibility of having an experience like that or multiple experiences like that, but you're also training your ability to make them happen. And so you wind up experiencing life and being differently. It's not like you get to stay the same and be the same person that you are right now. You literally change and experience life differently. And the direction of the consciousness work is always going in a direction of being a more empowered, clear-headed, authentic, honest person, more effective. The road is a weird one, though. It's definitely not clear, because if it was, you'd already be there,
Right.
It's
unintuitive.
Yeah, and it's quite challenging, because when people go into the I.C.G, whatever is being communicated by the facilitator will be heard from the current experience that someone has going on. And what we're trying to do is get you to stop having that, not necessarily stop, but grow out of that experience into a more inclusive, open-minded, and real one that's relating to whatever is real rather than whatever you already have going on. So there's a lot of dropping of things.
So a lot of times people say that voice inside your head. Does that resonate with what you're talking about? The narrative that we build up in our mind kind of thing?
Sure. Basically, the voice inside your head, in a nutshell, completely dominates your way of experiencing yourself and other people. It's every time you have an experience, that voice inside your head is narrating every experience that you're having. Even if you're not hearing it super loud, somebody walks up to you, or you have a conversation with your parents or something, there's a voice going on inside your head that's basically telling you what you think about it and how to think about it. And sometimes people pay attention to it, sometimes they don't pay attention to it, but it's definitely always there, and we don't know why. In general, people don't experience why am I talking to myself? What purpose does talking to myself serve? One thing you can ask yourself is, if I'm the one talking
Mm-hmm.
in my own head and I'm the one listening,
Mm-hmm.
then why do I need to talk to myself if I already know what I'm going to say? Like if I'm the one saying it,
Mm-hmm.
if that inner voice is me speaking, then I already know what I'm about to say.
Mm.
So why do I need to say it? Why talk to yourself?
So, as I'm understanding, is that we're trying to set up a little system where we can recognize that it's going off and then be able to consciously set that aside essentially so that we're more present.
Sure, yeah, like if people, have engaged in, meditation or mindfulness work, they've probably found momentary experiences where there's not a voice talking in their head, and then it'll come back pretty easily. It's really hard to stop talking to yourself.
Mm.
But they know they may have experienced that, like, oh, it's possible to not talk to myself.
Mm.
But what changes in your experience? Do, like, you suddenly disappear? No, you're still there. You're just, there's no talking in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we are perhaps trying to get people to experience is recognizing that having a voice in your head doesn't make your experience any more authentic or real.
Mm.
In fact, it probably muddles the experience massively, And
Right.
if you are just present without having a voice running around in your head, then that might actually be a more authentic experience of reality. But the thing is, it's quite difficult to get you to stop talking to yourself. So what we try to do basically is just get people to experience that the voice in their head isn't, you don't have to listen to it. It's still going to be there for the most part, but you can stop taking it seriously,
Right. Relating to it so much.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
totally.
Gotcha.
And instead relate to whatever is going on. That's kind of what's, again, with the self-expansion principle, we want people to relate to what actually is occurring. And whatever is going on in your head with your thoughts, your voice in your head is not necessarily occurring objectively. If you tell yourself, oh, that person's a real jerk, even though they're not doing anything that would necessarily imply that, you might experience them as being a jerk because you're telling yourself that. But if you pay more attention to them and sort of get out of your own head, you'll realize that you're just making that up. You're just projecting them being a jerk onto them. And what's really there is something else, And so we're trying to get people to go towards whatever is out there outside of themselves. That's why it's kind of expanding the self.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I guess the last thing was, why do you think this is hard to communicate to people? We understand, some of the fundamentals of, the actions that are required to be a functioning person as far as sleep and diet and exercise, and this seems to be another pillar for that is our mental health, so to speak. And what have you done to try and become more effective at, making the message relatable to people, and what are some of the difficulties you found in the process?
Well, I have found that once you get people to have an experience of what it is that's being communicated in the I.C.G, most people are very enthusiastic about it. For one thing, just the experience of being in a dyad and having the sense of connection and empathy with another person, and really having somebody else really listen to what you honestly have going on, and likewise being able to listen to somebody else is a very it's deeply enjoyable in a way. It feels very real. It makes you feel more connected to other people. It's very powerful. That alone, the dyad exercises alone, really brings people in and makes them feel like, oh, this is powerful. Whatever else is going on in the workshop, that really grounds it in something that people benefit from. So if you can get people to that point, where they're doing that, then a lot of times people will at least acknowledge that it's real and that it's powerful. They may not end up doing the workshop, but they will probably not say, oh, it's a bunch of nonsense. But it's hard to get people to grasp that it's real or powerful, or there is some value in it to them, if they don't get to the point where they have that experience. So what I usually try to do is I really try to just convince people to let go of whatever they have going on about it, it's okay. And we used to do preview nights. We didn't do one this time because I had everybody lined up for it already, but we used to do preview nights where it's like, okay, just come we'll do like an hour's worth of work, you know, and then, you know, you're not committed to anything. So I just try and get people to get to that point, because then if they do, then, you know, a lot of times they'll continue doing it. But if you can't get them to that point, then I don't know what to say. You know, it's like, I think in one sense, the I.C.G is quite a commitment, you know, it's 4 months. But I think the thing that might deter people is that people are really busy, and their sense of what they should be doing with their time is, by the time they're an adult, very ingrained in most people. They have like a whole worldview and a perspective and a sense of identity that needs to keep itself going. And if that sense of identity or worldview or perspective doesn't include self-inquiry or curiosity or a desire to feel more authentic, you know, then they're not gonna pursue it. Why would they? They have everything they need already set up as their worldview, you know? And so, you know, most of the people who wind up doing it are sensitive to the fact or aware of the fact that there is something that missing from their life, you know? They feel a little empty. Maybe they feel disingenuous, or like, man, there must be something more to all this, you know? And so then those type of people wind up usually pursuing it. But in terms of getting, like, you know, everybody to acknowledge that it's useful, there might be other ways to present it to people, more short form stuff, something that's not such a big commitment. So there's that. And then in another aspect of it, basically, once you have people already engaged in the work, the thing that's difficult to keep them going is that it's hard. It's really hard to, like, engage this level of honesty and authenticity, because it can be very painful, honestly. And it's actually who you are as a self, all the things you identify with, all the characteristics you have going on already, all of that probably is not interested in whatever is true in the least. Like, very rarely are people actually just profoundly curious to pursue what is the truth beyond whatever they want it to be.
Because the current life is good enough, essentially.
Not even necessarily that. It's just a function of the way that a self operates. A self, as in like a human, you know, an identity over there, relates everything they experience to themselves in terms of good and bad, aversion, attraction, you know, like you like it, you don't like it, everything, even in these like very subtle, minute little ways. And that's how we make meaning of our life. You're like, oh, I don't like that. Okay, I'm going to have a reaction, and I'm going to go away from it. Oh, I like that. I'm going to come to it, you know?
Right.
And this is just like how the day goes throughout the entire life, you know? And this is just a function of how a self works. But whatever is true has nothing to do with what you want or what you don't want. The truth could wind up being something you radically do not want.
In the current mindset.
Yeah.
Right.
But if it is true, then it's true, and you don't get a choice in the matter. So it doesn't serve the very powerful principle of being a self. Like, it doesn't hold your attention, because you'll immediately want to kind of start going back to how you normally operate. Because that's just what it is. You know, that's what a mind does. So it's not inherent in most people to want to pursue consciousness, because it doesn't necessarily serve them. But it just so also happens that when you do become more conscious of things, your life winds up getting better.
Right.
Like, you become more free, more effective, more empowered, more capable, you know, like more authentic, and, you know, generally there's a degree of happiness and contentment that comes from that type of stuff. But you can't go into it with that in mind, because then you'll just be looking for all the things that you already think would make you happy, you know? But you have to go for whatever is true, regardless of whatever you want. And that's not a usual way of relating to their experience, you know?
Right.
But you can train that. That's the thing. You know, even if you don't pursue that on your own, for the most part, you can train it. And so there's an element of discipline, and, like, you know, with the workshop that I teach, I try to get people to improve their integrity and their ability to keep their word, and then I task them with something like, go home and contemplate for 15 minutes every day. And once people start taking their word more seriously, then they'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they start doing that, then they can begin training things that they would not have done otherwise because their self doesn't want to do it, you know?
Ground up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have anything else you want to add?
Nope. That's it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ethan.